Hello, everybody. My name is Vanessa Oliver, and I am a registered dietitian with the UK HR Health and Wellness Department. I've been here for a little over 10 years, and we offer a lot of nutrition programming available to you as a UK employee or retiree or spouse. So if you have any questions about anything else nutrition related, please know that you can contact me via email. My name is Vanessa Oliver, and it's just vanessa.oliver@uky.edu. One of the things that we do talk about quite a lot in different modalities is the concept of emotional eating or eating in response to strong emotions. And there, I think, is a lot of worry, a lot of thought, maybe a lot of inner conversation around this specific topic of emotional eating. It is really complex, and I feel like there's a lot of guilt and shame that can be associated with this feeling that you perhaps eat for emotional reasons. So I want to talk a little bit about that today, as well as recognize maybe a different path, maybe meeting emotions with kindness and a feeling of exploration instead of those feelings of guilt and shame that are so often associated with emotional eating. So one sort of concept that I want to have kind of simmering underneath my chat today is that there is a lot of research. Well, everything that I'll be talking about today is research-based. I do want to mention that. But there is a lot of research that recognizes that the concept of intentionally restricting food, all right, whether it's a physical restriction or a mental or emotional restriction, like telling yourself, oh, I shouldn't be eating this, that restriction can just by itself trigger feelings of loss of control or less control around food and eating. And that can feel like emotional eating. All right. So whether or not you are eating, in fact, in response to strong emotions or eating in response to this idea of restriction can often have the same result. And today we're going to talk about ways to comfort yourself, to nurture yourself, and maybe work toward resolving some of these feelings, whether they are the high emotions or feelings of restriction and guilt. I do want to say that we all experience emotions that can act as triggers for food and food behavior, but recognize that food doesn't actually fix those feelings in the long term. All right. So we do want to look at choosing to be more gentle with ourselves, increase those levels of self-compassion, especially when we are using food in maybe a way that we feel like we shouldn't be, because doing this can help us let go of those feelings of guilt, break cycles of maybe disconnected eating, as well as breaking that cycle of using food as your first emotional coping mechanism. You are going to use food sometimes as an emotional coping mechanism, and that is okay. But it is important to explore other options for coping with strong emotions so that food is not your only choice. And this will help you replace feelings of guilt with feelings of more self-compassion, more exploration, and kind of free you up to continue to be curious about, like, what's going on here, right? Why am I feeling these feelings? Why am I choosing food first? So I think that kind of hints at some of the complexities, right? As I mentioned, there are a lot of general emotional reasons for eating, and not all of them are negative, right? I think emotional eating, especially in common media and just among conversations with ourselves and our friends and our peers, emotional eating has a very negative connotation, but we eat for lots of reasons, right? We eat for celebration all the time. Birthdays, weddings, right? There are even certain foods associated with holidays and rituals in lots of cultures, probably in all culture. And every time we celebrate a significant experience with food, this emotional connection deepens. For some, however, this emotional connection to food develops into a coping mechanism. And lots of times, not all the time, but lots of times this can stem from historically not being able to access your internal feelings for various reasons, okay? Now, the reasons might be known, they might be unknown, you know. If you are unsure, one way that may help to recognize the reasons behind the development of eating as a coping mechanism is to like ask yourself why you're eating, right? Have this internal conversation with yourself. It may seem funny if you've never done that before, but ask yourself why you're eating. What need are you trying to fill? Are you hungry? Maybe. Is it something else? Maybe. If you find that you're doing quite a bit of eating when you're not biologically hungry, when you're not physically hungry, there's a good chance that you are using food for a different reason, right? That's kind of logical. But it is so important to, again, keep like this neutral observation mind when you are asking yourselves these questions. It is, again, I'll probably say this a few times during the presentation, it is okay to use food for non-hunger reasons, okay? But it's even better to know why. So the best way to gauge if you are using food in this way is to ask yourself, you know, if my body only needs like a certain amount of food to feel satisfied, which most of us do, but I continue to eat after I've surpassed that amount, then what other need am I trying to fill with food? Or, you know, ask yourself this question in a way that sounds way more natural to yourself than what I just said. But again, whatever you do, it's so important to keep judgment out of these questions, okay? You are just asking the question and then observing what the answer might be. Because if that guilt or shame comes into play, then that's gonna be likely a perpetuation of a guilt or shame cycle. Okay, so I'm going to ask here, I am going to ask you all a question and maybe you can think about it or maybe put an answer in the chat. Has anyone ever said to themselves, well, I feel really guilty because I ate XYZ? Okay, has anyone ever said that to themselves before? I feel guilty, I feel guilty, I feel guilt. Yes, we got a real quick yes in that chat, right? You know what I usually say back? Okay, there's some guilt going on. Oh, I see some familiar names. Hi, y'all. Yeah, so what I usually say back is, did you steal the food? Did you steal the food? Because that is the only reason why guilt would be an appropriate emotion. Okay, eating is never a crime. Eating is never a violation of a moral code. Even though eating and morality gets very unfairly intertwined in our society. I could talk a lot about that, right? But again, research shows that although you might get some very short-term kind of relief for eating to hit strong emotions, to balance strong emotions, the rush of guilt that is so often associated with eating for non-hunger reasons is usually enough to wipe away that relief, right? And then also replace it with a renewed need to eat because of that negative rush of feelings. So it's almost like this, again, cycle, right? You hold back, you hold back, you hold back. We're all human. We can only hold back for so long. We eat something. It's often eating in a non-controlled or almost like a furtive or hidden way because you've already convinced yourself that you shouldn't be doing this because you feel guilty. And then feelings of guilt and shame exacerbate. They keep building and building and building until you start that cycle again. And this is why starting off this exploration of your feelings in that judgment-free zone is so critical, for sure. Okay, so just scrolling down here, we're going to be looking at some new paths, right, to explore. And really a baseline for exploring these paths has to be first learning what your emotional triggers are. if that makes sense. So obviously, I mentioned in the beginning that there are a lot of general emotional reasons for eating, but looking at some kind of specific feelings that might be involved or what I'm talking about here. You might find that food is taking care of some very specific feelings, like, well, maybe while I'm talking, if you all want to tell me in the chat what some feelings that you notice you might be associating with eating. Maybe you don't know, but maybe you've already started doing some exploration. Okay. And sometimes even just saying these feelings out loud, right, or in the chat, in this case, can help you recognize what I said in the beginning, which is food is not going to fix this feeling, right? It might be a short-term relief, but how does food actually fix boredom? How does food really fix stress? Are there other options that could fix boredom or stress? Food might do it a little bit, right? So if we're bored, it gives us a sensory, something different to experience. But what are some other things that you could experience? And keeping guilt and shame out of answering these questions, always top number one. Okay. So I'm seeing here boredom, I'm seeing stress, a lot of boredom and stress. Yeah. Okay. Some anxiety, some fear, some worry. Okay. I'm seeing fatigue. I'm seeing a lack of control over other parts of life. Absolutely. Feeling inadequate. Okay. Okay. So certainly, with boredom, eating is something to do. I find myself doing that, especially if you're doing a task that you're like not totally in love with. Maybe you're staring at spreadsheets or something and you feel like you need a little bit of extra oomph in your life. Yes, of course, boredom can be something that pops up, and eating could be something to do. Let's see, some people mentioned stress and anxiety, using food to calm oneself. That is also very normal, right? Think about, you may not remember when you were a baby or a small child, but what happens oftentimes when a baby is upset, right? They're given something to eat, okay? And they find comfort in that, absolutely. Let's see, frustration or anger as a higher level of frustration, eating can often be a release, right? Especially if you're eating what kind of food? If you're eating something crunchy, right? That can be a real stress buster, right? Eating can be a form of procrastination sometimes, like, oh, I'll just do that after I get a snack, right? Eating can also be a form of connection. If you're either feeling lonely, using food as a friend, or if you are eating to be part of a crowd, and eating as for connection can be emotionally healthy. I do want to make that clear, as long as you're making that choice to feel connected, like that connection should serve you somehow, but it's still technically like a non-hunger reason for eating. Loving food. Yeah, absolutely. Food should make you happy, right? We're told otherwise, that food and eating is a bad thing. But food and eating is a joyful thing. There's so much love in so many different foods and different ways to eat. Yeah. Some other reasons why people might be choosing food. Loosening the reins. I think this one is really interesting, right? Sometimes eating in a manner that might be a little bit out of control is the only outlet for people who are very high functioning, like perfectionists, for example, or if you are a very rules-based person in every other part of your life. Sometimes eating can be a way of letting off steam, or if you feel like you are being controlled in such a manner at work or at home, sometimes eating can be a way to loosen those reins. And eating, again, can be part of excitement. It can be a part of joy. It can be fun. Okay. And that's none of these are bad things. And I want to be, again, so intentional about saying that, right? eating for these reasons are not bad. They're not meeting the reasons, but eating is not a bad thing. Okay. So with this compassion, all right, identifying these specific feelings of what might be happening is a first step toward recognizing what emotional eating is, how and why it occurs, and then exploring other paths for functioning, right? So that is part of compassionate self-care, all right? Another part of compassionate self-care is acknowledging that feeling these feelings is part of meeting your basic needs, okay? These needs of experiencing and feeling emotions. But there are needs even more basic than those that have to be met first, all right? Even before you start tackling other ways of meeting strong emotions. And a lot of people, for various reasons, stuff down that acknowledgement that you are entitled to having your basic needs met. So sometimes acknowledging your worth as a whole and complete person that deserves compassion and deserves self-care is the work that needs to be done first. All right. And I'm talking about basic needs like rest, like pleasure, all right, like intellectual stimulation and comfort. Okay. These need to be met first. And if you are having difficulty with meeting those needs, that might be something to work on elsewhere before you start thinking about exploring emotional eating more. Okay. If you feel like those basic needs have been met, then we're going to talk about self-care plus. Okay. Self-care plus can be sometimes called self-nurturance. It's like being extra nice to yourself. Okay. And it's allowing times for experiences that just add to the joy in your life. Food can be one of these. Okay. Some other ideas might be whatever you think of when you're like pampering yourself a little bit, you know, and sometimes sharing these in the chat can be helpful for other folks who are listening in because maybe they have difficulty in thinking of ways to be nice to yourself, thinking of ways to increase that self-nurturance. But again, you're laying the foundation for seeing yourself as a whole and complete person that deserves compassion, that deserves love and nurturance when you think of these things that you love and when you engage in these activities that you love. It could be as simple as taking a walk, could be as simple as taking a bath or a long shower. It might be doing a breathing exercise or playing with your cat or your dog or whatever furry or non-furry pet you might have. It could be getting yourself fresh flowers for your desk or for your home space. It could be listening to music or watching a silly video. All right. All of these create a feeling of nurturance, which is so important if you are looking to explore beyond that cycle of eating in response to strong emotions. Okay. So when you are able to practice this self-nurturance, it's going to be every time that you do engage in these self-nurturing behaviors, let me say it this way, it becomes easier to do because you will have in the front of your brain these activities that make you feel good. And so sometimes you will choose food to make you feel good, but knowing that you have these other activities that also make you feel good and choosing those more often make it more likely that you're going to reach for those activities. Okay, so thinking about things like that. Again, if you want to put in the chat some things that you do that make you feel good, sometimes it's just a good reminder to yourself. Okay, so that's one thing, is finding other options besides food while holding in place that food is not a terrible option. Another thing to do to sort of break the cycle of feeling bad about emotional eating is sitting with feelings. So this is different, right? So what I was talking about before is almost like a distraction, okay? Taking a time out to try to figure out emotional triggers so that your eating is more connected to that physical satisfaction rather than feelings, taking like a little bit of tune-in time, okay, can be very helpful. And tuning in can also help if you feel that you eat in a distracted manner often. This can also help with mindful eating. I'm not talking too much about mindful eating because that is a whole other concept in and of itself. But taking this time out to sort of recognize what your emotional triggers are can work toward a more mindful eating pattern if that's something that you are interested in. I do want to acknowledge that a lot of people have put in the chat some things that do make them feel good. And I hope that putting that in the chat sort of just reminds yourself, if it's been a minute since you asked yourself what sorts of experiences you value. Reading, cross-stitching, hiking, or being out in nature. And, I do want to say too, I would urge everyone who is thinking of activities that they enjoy to enjoy these feelings without conditions, okay? Enjoy the feeling of reading a book or doing handcrafts because you enjoy it, not in any kind of punitive way. And I don't want to pick on anyone in the chat, but sometimes when you say, okay, I'm doing this because it keeps my hands busy, there's almost this sort of underlying punishment in there, right? And so it takes practice, but working on just enjoying the activity for itself and not a ... if that makes sense. Okay, so enjoy the thing because of the thing. Don't enjoy the thing because it keeps you from doing something else. Okay. So sitting with your feelings, taking some time out to try to figure out what those emotional triggers are. Okay, sometimes this can be a short-term exercise. You can set a timer for if you're starting to feel some strong emotions, right? And you feel like you might choose food as a result of this strong emotion. You might set a little timer just for a couple of minutes. Find a comfortable position, as comfortable as you can, in as quiet a place as you can, and explore what these feelings are that might be bubbling up. What are some of the emotional triggers that you might be feeling? And when that timer goes off, right, think to yourself, like, is food still my primary choice here? All right. If the answer is yes, that is okay. It is okay. All right. If the answer is like, oh, maybe, then you can continue to ask yourself, what do I need at this moment to deal with my current feelings? Okay. You're uncovering what it is that you really want. All right. And this takes practice. This is not something that might happen immediately. Okay. And so a certain amount of patience is definitely important here. But ask yourself, what do I need in an ideal world? What do I need at this moment to deal with my current feelings? Okay. And just notice that answer when it arises. Again, keeping judgment out of this exercise. Maybe the answer might come up that you're looking for boredom relief. Maybe the answer might be connection. Maybe the answer might be this need to feel nurtured or entertained, okay? Once you notice that answer, then you ask yourself, how can I, or how might I fulfill this need and this feeling without food? Again, you may still choose food, but what are some other options? If you're feeling that need for connection, can you reach out to your partner or your friends or your coworkers, right? If you are looking for nurturing, some of those ideas that you put in the chat might help. Maybe going for a walk, thinking of what activities might nurture you. If you are eating, looking for entertainment, again, that's where maybe TikTok comes in, right? Or a funny sort of soundbite on your phone. Maybe you're looking for spaciousness. Maybe you're looking for some time alone and eating brings you that somehow? Are there other things that you can do to honor that need for feeling some alone time? Okay, so this is what we're doing. We are uncovering what we really want. So just to go over that really, really briefly again, are you biologically hungry? First, ask yourself. If yes, then yes, absolutely eat. And I run into this quite a lot with clients, right, who feel like they shouldn't eat breakfast, or they eat a very, very light first meal, and then lunch comes around, and for various reasons, maybe they don't eat that. And then they can't understand why they're super hungry at the end of the day. So if you are maybe experiencing that, please eat something. Anything is okay, right? You want to get some calories in there. Your body is made to run on calories. If you are able to further explore this, ask yourself what you're feeling. If you can, take a little bit of a time out and try to get in touch with your feelings. This is what I'm talking about here. And I want to really briefly, please tell me if you can see feelings wheel. Okay, this is what I want. So you should all be able to see a colorful wheel here, which represents all of the different feelings that, not all, many of the different feelings that we feel as humans. In the center here are kind of the base, broad feelings: happy, sad, disgusted, angry, fearful, bad, surprised. Some of us might stop there, but if you look at the handout, you can see all of the different gradations of these base feelings. And if we are not allowing ourselves to really experience these feelings, right, it can be really challenging to recognize what you are feeling in a given point of time. So sometimes just a simple handout or simple resource like this can help you recognize what your feelings are. And once you recognize what your feelings are, then you can recognize what your needs are. And you are able to come up with some more specific kind of activities or specific, this is what happens when you hit my age, you forget words, but some specific ways to assuage the feelings that you're feeling, and know that there are options besides food. Okay, so using something like this, which I'm happy to share with Azetta, to send out to you all, might be helpful. But you can also just Google feelings wheel and you'll find something online as well. Once you know, again, what these feelings are, then you're going to be able to know what you need, right? And again, it's okay if you don't know at first. Just this action of taking the pause, of increasing your awareness that there might be other options out there besides food, this is all progress, okay? If coping with emotional eating were like a super duper obvious thing, then food would not be your primary coping mechanism. Okay, this takes practice, but first it takes awareness and acknowledgement that there are other paths out there. Okay, so uncovering what it is that you really, really want, asking yourself what you're feeling and what you do need. So I do want to acknowledge a fairly large elephant in the room, which is that we've all been through a 3-year or longer, about 3 years, pandemic, right? And I know things are changing. I know that it's a little bit, we're all kind of used to it at this point, but anytime our worlds are shaken in the way that they have been since 2020, our stress is going to increase, right? And for a lot of people, anxiety increases along with that stress level. It is absolutely normal that this may have brought about a change in eating habits, and maybe an increase in some emotional eating because of an increase in these stressors, right? I mean, if you think about it, emotional eating is a sign that your life stressors have surpassed your current coping mechanisms and you haven't had a chance to catch up yet, okay? So because these new or unexpected or scary experiences have surpassed your current coping mechanisms, you might be reverting back to coping mechanisms that have worked for you in the past, even going back to when you were a little kid, right? And so that's where that food comes in. Choosing food to cope can also be a big sign, almost like a canary in the coal mine, that your work life is out of balance. Okay. If you discover this, it might be some time to maybe reevaluate some things and find ways to add back that balance. We know that people express and display stress in a lot of different ways. Okay. So maybe if you're able to identify some of these strong feelings or emotions that we looked at earlier on that feelings wheel, to help you identify the emotion with which you act out your stress and meet that emotion, can help you find another self-care technique. Okay, so that might be something to consider. I want to look at some other, you guys had some really great self-care ideas that you put in the chat, hiking and cross-stitching. This sometimes just having an idea in front of you can be super helpful if it's very difficult to feel or think of self-care techniques in the moment. And this is something that I like to do. I like to make a list of things that I enjoy, because I can always access this list. I can keep it on my phone, sure, but I can always access this list mentally as well, because I'm keeping it in the front of my brain of things that I enjoy to do. Because when you're feeling stressed out, when you're feeling anxious, it can be really difficult to focus your thoughts in a constructive manner, okay? But the more that you do practice these things, the more that they will take up that space in your brain, right? And it'll leave less room for some of the unhelpful thoughts or behaviors. So some things I'll do, I will watch a funny video. I am a fan of TikTok. I will maybe reorganize my space a little bit. I will maybe go outside for a quick walk. I will definitely listen to music. I will sometimes use a good smelling lotion, or I'll I'll turn on an essential oil diffuser. Sometimes I will have a dance party of one in my office, or in my living room. Sometimes I will just stretch, right? Sometimes I will reach out to a friend, or sometimes I will make tea. Sometimes I will color. These are all items that I have thought about to introduce into my self-care practice. Maybe some of these will feel good to you or sound good to you. And so if you have this option just to create, whether it's a mental list, an actual written list, or a list on your phone, it can be really helpful to help, again, increase self-care, give you options to choose to other than food, right? Holding these ideas and food as equal options, though, again, is critically important to removing judgment and increasing that self-compassion, right? So what we're looking at here, again, it can be scary, all right? It can be new. It can be, maybe you're feeling like, no, I don't even know where to start. But again, I want to go back to identifying what your feelings are first. Asking and answering that question, again, without judgment, just with neutral observation. And that is going to be a takeaway message for you today. All right. Asking yourself what you're feeling and allowing yourself to ask yourself that question, I think, is a big one. So if you're feeling nervous or silly or shocked or happy, or if you've got some outrage going on, state of the world today, all of those are valid feelings. How can you meet those feelings, right? How can you deal with the source of those emotions or feelings? Because once you do learn or relearn new ways of meeting those feelings, then it does help you recognize and realize that food can nourish you in constructive ways. and food will eventually resume its role as that source of joy and as that source of pleasure in a much less threatening way than perhaps it is. So that is what I've got for you today. I wanted to leave plenty of room for questions or comments. Okay. Is there anything here that maybe struck you a little bit? I feel like lots of times the two things that I hear from people are, I can't name my emotion, or I've never asked myself that question. So maybe that's something that resonated with you. Another one that often resonates with people is, can I get that self-care guide? Or that invites them to think of ways that they are able to meet these strong feelings, right? Thinking of things that they enjoy. And maybe you've just not allowed yourself to think of things that make you happy recently. So if that's something that resonates with you, then I would absolutely encourage you all to make that little list, to think of those things that make you happy. Because again, if you do that and do it often, then you're going to be able to reach for things other than food first. Okay. So if anyone has any questions or comments, I'm happy to take those at this time.